Hi, Gail Fugit, CEO of the Advertising Research Foundation, and I'm here with Jeremy Lockhorn, who is a Vice President of Emerging and Mobile Media. Is that correct?
Good enough.
Not quite. All right, Emerging Media and Mobile Lead. All right, I wasn't that far off,
exactly.
right?
It's close enough.
Razorfish, it's kind of the order. You've had a very interesting career in the whole field, in the whole area of digital media. So my question is, how did you come to be here 2016 at CES? What was your path? To kind of tell me your story about your background.
Yeah, I've been at Razorfish for almost 20 years. This is
Congratulations.
January. Thank you. Yeah. And they keep
It's like my career, but not that many people do that anymore.
I know, it's usually you're hopping around,
especially in digital.
Yes, exactly. But I've loved my job since the day I started. I've had the opportunity to work with great brands. And when I started, I was at a company, a small company that was full service, and we got acquired by Avenue A at the time.
Okay.
And then,
there was also a digital agency?
Yes, yeah,
yes.
Media-only digital agency at the time. And so anyway, but when I started at the small agency, I was the first full-time hire.
Wow.
So the founder had been running it for about a year by himself. And then I came on board, and I was just fortunate enough to find this company.
How did you find each other?
Through a friend, actually. Got introduced to him, and I was working at a direct mail shop, traditional direct mail shop at the time. And, was really eager to get into digital because it was just exploding. This was like 96, 97. And
so we say the bleeding edge. You were really at the bleeding edge. That's like the beginning.
I don't know if that was the bleeding edge, but it was early. So I was fortunate enough to get in here, and I had the opportunity to kind of do a bit of everything. I was writing code, I was building Flash banners and microsites, I was negotiating media plans and
so
doing
very
deals
entrepreneurial.
Because we were so small, I got exposed to everything, and then as we grew, I had the opportunity to sort of figure out where I wanted to go next. And so to your point about, bleeding edge, but I always was most interested in what was coming next. And sort of just fell into this position of being the guy that scouts and figures that out for the company, and then brings that back in the form of education and, ideation, partnership, and so on. So it's been, I've been very fortunate, but it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, wow, you'd be a dream partner for a client with that orientation, I think. So how did you decide? I'm sure there were certain points in time where you had, disappointment or failure. How did you decide to hang in?
That's a great question. This space changes so frequently that it's not without its frustrations.
I've had plenty.
Yeah, right. But I think I truly believe that we have the opportunity every day to do something that has never been done before, right? And our clients ask that of us, right?
Yes.
And we push on them just as hard as they're pushing on us. So when you're doing that stuff, that kind of truly innovative work stuff that's never been done before, you're going to fail. You just have to go into it with this knowledge that maybe 9 times out of 10, you're not going to nail it, right? Something is going to go wrong or a little bit sideways, or it may be a complete failure. But if you're learning,
how do you deal with that?
You have to recalibrate, how you think about ROI and how you think about success, right? If you're learning, then
do you lock yourself in the closet and eat cottage cheese, or do you do you have a specific approach?
Lots of wine.
Okay, all right.
Which helps. Tequila shots now and again.
Okay.
But especially with the clients when those things are going sideways.
Yeah.
But I think those that are really successful and have hung in the space have that attitude of just recalibrating how you think about failure and taking those learnings, taking the whippings almost, and using those scars to lay foundation for what's going to come next.
Yeah. What advice would you give the next generation as they, what I get asked most often by the next generation is how do I know when to hold them and when to fold them? How do I know when to hang in and when to say, all right, no, time to move?
That is a great question. I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny to ask a guy who's been at the same company for almost 20 years that question.
Yeah.
There have been periods
Well,
where
yeah, but I think about I was at General Mills 32 years, but I had 19 bosses in 21 years.
Right.
I didn't like them all. I'll be candid on film.
Yeah.
They did not like me.
Right.
I'll be candid.
Not everybody gets along. It's
Right.
okay. Yeah.
But it was somehow just trying to navigate that whole thing, and
Yeah.
how you kind of sometimes you're kind of hanging by your fingernails, and you just kind of you like climb back up and in.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for when people come to Razorfish, it's like I think they get this. They quickly get that it's obviously it's a technology-driven company.
Yeah.
It's an innovation-driven company, but it's also a very entrepreneurial company, right? Like, it's very rare that you're going to get told no, right? Like, if you have an idea and there's value, then
That's great.
and you can get people excited about it, whether
Yep.
it's internal people or the clients.
Yep.
Then you're going to find support, right? And so I guess to spin that to your original question, which is, what's the advice for the next generation? It's like, if you're not in an environment where you have that opportunity, then I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it may be time to think about folding them, to
Yeah.
use your analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one piece of advice I've heard is well, if you can't get along with your boss, then it's time to leave. And I just think I remember actually my dad said, so you think that's a first boss that you're not going to get along with, right? Like, it's a little bit more figuring out like what's at stake if you do leave, like what you might be leaving behind, which is kind of to your earlier point, what's in your future there, instead of just this moment in time.
Yep.
And it seems like it's going to be important for the next generation to have that forward-thinking skill that I think you have. Now, one of the things I've been so impressed with in what's been published about you and what you've published, Jeremy, is already being very strategic about how clients are allocating their budgets and what percent of clients, and actually starting up a conversation about what percent of clients have set aside a separate mobile budget or a separate digital budget or a separate. What inspired that level of strategic thinking, or where does that conviction come from to really think about the world that way? It's pretty unique. From my vantage point, leading the ARF now, not a lot of people are looking at how budgets are being allocated.
Really?
Strategically.
Strategically,
right?
yeah.
I mean, they want to know, am I going to get, what percent of your money am I going to get? That's more the orientation.
Yeah.
Not what's your strategy for allocating it, and how could I get in and actually help you with how to allocate your your dollars forward, not just looking back.
Right.
I guess I'll say.
Yeah. I think it comes down to, a lot of people will just say follow the eyeballs, right? And as media consumption changes and people are, watching video on mobile phones, for example, you have to be there and you have to allocate the right amount of their budget. But there's a weird nuance to it or a trick to it, which is the other argument you hear a lot with especially when it comes to mobile is, and this is still true, and the stat has been thrown around for the last 2 or 3 years in terms of time spent on mobile versus the ad dollars, and the ratio is just totally out of whack,
yes,
right? It's significantly smaller, right?
Yes. No matter how you look at it, people can argue over the data sources, but yes.
Exactly. But I don't mean to completely dismiss that, but I think that you can't just look at time spent. You've got to look at other factors in the channel to determine what that allocation ought to be like. And that, I guess, is sort of how we try to approach it from a strategic perspective, is looking at not only what is time spent, what is the scale of the channel, but what are the opportunities to really engage the right audience, and is there an opportunity for my client's brand to deliver value in that context? And if there's not, then it can be a challenge, particularly in digital, where consumers have been so empowered with choice and control over everything, right? If you're not there providing value, then it's difficult to get any kind of attention.
And is your perspective, you did speak a bit about creative and being predictive, is your perspective that creative should be different across touch points, or do you think it should be customized to the touch point? Do you have a point of view about that?
That's a really great question, and it's something that clients ask all the time and struggle with, right? Like, how do I think about creating content across all of these different channels? And what I would say is that I think you need a sound idea that is sort of independent of channel, And so, if you think about the old way that creative was done, TV was the big dog, right? And so everything started with the 30-second spot, and that was the core of the idea. And then everything sort of cascaded from that, Out of home ties into that campaign theme. We would always do takedowns of the TV idea for digital, et cetera. And that's really obviously changed over the last few years. And it's flipped where the TV is not the core of the idea. The core of the idea is just, what's the story? What's the value that I want to deliver? And then how does that manifest itself across all of the different channels? And so I would say once you have that idea, that foundation, then it's a best practice whenever possible from my perspective to leverage the unique capabilities of the channel that you're deploying to, right? So on TV, it's going to be a linear 30-second spot.
Interesting.
On the web, desktop web, maybe it starts to be something that's invites more participation, whether that's via a social campaigin or even interactive video, right?
Could be gamification.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then when it comes to mobile, you start to think about unique capabilities of that device, right? Like it's got a microphone. Can we actually have the consumer talk to us, right? Can we use the accelerometer to create some sort of 360, as I move the phone around, the experience changes, or that becomes a way to interact with the experience. So those, I think the idea can be thematically similar across all of those channels, but you get the best engagement if you're able to really kind of leverage those unique capabilities, because increasingly that's how consumers are engaging with other types of content on the device. And if the ad experience is not delivering on that, or the marketing experience is not delivering on that, then there's a disconnect with how they expect to engage with that.
Right. So what do you say? How do you approach, like there are all these, we're in this kind of C-space area where there are all these, secret meetings happening with the advertisers and the companies about, they're cutting deals. What do you say to an advertiser that currently has a majority of their budget in television or in linear TV? How should they be looking at shifting, as a strategist, a business strategist who's looked at what percent of dollars are being actually allocated and dedicated toward particular platforms, I'll call them?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of syndicated research that we'll try to pull in some of those cases. The Mobile Marketing Association published their SMOX report.
SMOX, right? Yeah, we were partners with them in that.
And so, I think those kinds of things begin to build a case. But then I think, the other way we try to look at it is, just carving off small percentages, right? Shifting 0.5%, 1%, right?
Yeah.
Because for those brands that are spending on TV, they're usually spending a lot, and carving off just a little bit, is a fair amount of money that you can begin to get some significant experimentation and good sort of guidance, from these new channels.
Yeah.
And I think back to, when mobile was first exploding, and shortly after the iPhone came out in 2007, and everybody was, or even before that, and everybody was thinking about, how do I engage with people on mobile? We were building the case that same approach, right? Like take 0.5%, take 0.25%, whatever it is, and just do the testing now. Because if you as a brand are early, you're going to be ahead of all of your competitors in terms of learning. You're going to have the best practices locked down, so that when the channel reaches scale, you're ready. You're ready to rock and roll. Not that it's never going to change, but you've got those best practices that you can be nimble and move forward with.
Yeah, I really like that idea. When I was at General Mills, we actually, for a year, I can't take credit, my team did this, but they did 100 panels of tests where they ran in parallel internet research to either telephone or mall, the traditional version. But we didn't ask anybody, and we didn't tell anybody. We just racked up this data set. So at the end of the year, we could run it and start to validate.
Right.
So it was exactly what you said. It was just placing these really tiny little bets because we were doing it anyway. So it was just one little add-on.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very good advice.
But it's amazing how much data you can get from those little tests, right?
Absolutely.
And how much learning can come from those
And also,
things.
I mean, if you raise kids, time flies.
Right.
Like you look around and all of a sudden you've got a year's gone and you've got 100 panels. Well, who knew?
Yeah,
And if
right.
you just start.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, if you started in 2007, imagine how much learning you'd have now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and those brands that did start in 2007 are well ahead of their competitors. The other thing that's really interesting about that space and those kinds of experiments is, you may design an experiment or a panel or a test to look at a specific channel like mobile or display on the web, desktop web. But you will very quickly find in many cases that there's so much intersection between all of the channels, right, that you learn things in mobile that actually affect your TV strategy, for example, right? And those often come as surprises, but it's another sort of proof point that, like, if you're not doing that, then you're missing a huge opportunity to sort of impact back to the channel where you are allocating, a significant amount of the budget.
Mm-hmm. So talk about a little bit about successes. What do you see as big successes from this past year? We're like first week of January.
Yeah.
People talk about resolutions. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your successes.
Yeah. Last year was another great year of sort of continued experimentation. I think a lot of what we did sort of centered around what I was just talking about, which is the intersection of mobile with other channels. We all know that mobile is very, very rarely used in isolation. You're exposed to out of home while you're walking down the street or riding the bus. 80% plus of people, depending on whose numbers you look at, use their smartphones while they're in front of the television.
Right.
So it begs this question of, how do I capitalize on that multi-screen environment? How do I track that individual user across device and all of my ad exposures or engagements across all of those different devices? And we did a ton of experimentation and work on that front. Working with some of the companies actually that are here exhibiting at CSpace and a couple on the main show floor that are able to tie TV ad exposure to either downstream web or mobile behavior, and then do retargeting, either ad sync, so when your spot is on air.
Can you say what they are?
Samba would be one.
Okay. Yep.
Alfonso is another one.
Uh-huh.
There's a few others, but those two come to mind. So either delivering an ad on mobile in sync with TV, which I think is a really interesting way. It does a couple of things, right?
They complement each other, though. It's not the same ad. It's like customized to that
ideally,
platform.
it's customized. Yeah. But it strategically it does a couple of things, right? Like those 80% of people that we talked about that are using their phones while they're watching TV are doing one of two things. They're either super engaged with the TV content, they're searching for information about the show, about the actors, whatever. And in that case, you're really reinforcing the ad message that's happening on the screen. And in the other case, they're playing a game, or they're on they're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And they may not be paying full attention to the television, and there's an opportunity to sort of recapture some of those eyeballs that you're missing from the television ad exposure. So we think that's really interesting. We've done a few experiments with that. I can't really talk about the brands, but we've had some real success stories there. And then also just using that same methodology to really kind of understand the user behavior across the different devices, which I think is...
I really like that.
It's crucial, right? Like everybody's asking that question.
It's the same consumer.
That's exactly right. And at the end of the day, the brands don't care what device they reach. They care what person they're reaching, right? Or what people they're reaching. And being able to suss that out has been challenging, but it's we as an industry are getting better at it. It's going to ultimately lead to a place where we're able finally to get to unduplicated reach and frequency across all of these different channels, and that's going to inform, all of the media mix modeling, like what we were just talking about in terms of budget allocation.
Do you think that the models have been able to keep up with these touch points? How are we going to address that?
Well, so I think a lot of this
What's your recipe?
I think a lot of this this cross-device experimentation is the key to that, right? Like finding a way to model the interaction and the engagement and the exposure from that one person across all of those multiple devices. And there's a bunch of different approaches to it. I don't know that any are 100% right yet, but we're getting close. But at the end of the day, to me, that's, especially coming from the digital space, that's the key. Is like let's apply this sort of census-driven approach where we're truly able to capture those engagements and those exposures.
Yeah. How far away are we?
That's a great question. I've been saying that we're 18 months away for probably
a long
3
time.
years. Yeah, so.
That's great. Yeah, I have a few things like that too. Like time keeps just moving.
Yeah. But it does feel like we're getting closer. And to see, Atlas, the third-party ad server, which now Facebook owns, actually
Yes.
spun out of Avenue A,
Okay.
which came together with Razorfish, right?
Yes.
And when Microsoft bought Quantive, which owned Avenue A, they were interested in Atlas, and then they subsequently sold it to Facebook.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've been following what Facebook has been doing with it with great interest because, we were heavily invested in the original product, and a lot of our clients are still using it as a third-party ad server. So their whole theory of people-based marketing, we think, is pretty interesting, and they still have work to do, but there's a lot of promise there for sure.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jeremy, let's close out with a prediction. What's your prediction for 2016?
It's just one.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think.
Well, okay, you can have more.
I'll give you one that has probably a few implications, right?
I gave 3 at Cannes, but it took too long.
It took too long. Did they cut you off? Did you get the hook?
It just kind of kept going and going,
Yeah.
right? So like,
I'll try to be
We're kind
succinct.
of trying to do one at these, but
Yeah.
but for you, we're near the end of the day here.
Okay.
It's raining. Well,
I got a special
indulgence.
credit. Yeah. Okay. So I think
You probably have an umbrella in your backpack since you're from Seattle, and I don't have one. So.
I do. I never leave home without it. So I think what we're going to see is growth in the importance of context.
Okay.
And it's something that it's a trend that's been building over the last couple of years. But when I say the importance of context or the growth of context, specifically what I'm talking about, it's especially true on mobile. It's true across all channels, but the mobile device really is where it shines, right? And the device is so good at knowing you, its owner, right? Like it has your calendar, it has your contacts.
Well, and it is the one personal device. The television is a personal. The tablet maybe is. Some of those things are shared across households.
Right, exactly. But you don't share your phone, right? For the most part.
Not typically.
Yeah. So it knows all of that about you, and it knows where you're at. It knows the weather where you're at. It knows what time of day it is. All of these things, right? And it's those kinds of inputs that are enabling things like Google Now to tell you you've got a flight. The traffic between here and there is X. You need to leave in the next 10 minutes to make your flight on time, right? Like you get that proactive push alert. And so the device is getting so good at knowing your context that it's actually starting to deliver what you want before you even ask for it, right? It comes back to the predictive thing that we were talking about before. And so I think, both Android and iOS announced new features with Marshmallow and iOS 9, where at the OS level, that stuff is going to be built in and become more pervasive. So it's going to take the expectation from a consumer perspective in terms of the device's ability to deliver contextually relevant information from here to here, right? And we as marketers, I think, have to be well aware of that. Again, because if we're not meeting that expectation of every other interaction that's happening on the phone, then we're just going to get dismissed, and it could actually be a negative brand experience. So I think that's the biggest one. And I'll close out with a quote that I always like to use that sort of supports this point from Howard Gossage, who's one of my advertising heroes. He was an ad man in the 50s and 60s, and was one of the most ardent critics of the ad industry. And his writings are fantastic.
So many of those ad men were. It's so fascinating.
Right? Yeah. But he's got this one great quote that supports contextual relevance really well, and that is, people don't read advertising, they read what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad, right? And to me, that's just, if you can deliver something that's so relevant and provides enough value, it ceases to be advertising. It just becomes content or an experience, and is not perceived as advertising. And that's when the magic really happens, and I think that's the opportunity that we have, given how much the device knows about you and our ability as marketers to leverage that context to deliver that relevance.
I love that. So Jeremy Lockhorn, thank you so much for your time. A really, really compelling story about how to take contextual relevance and translate it into values-based connectivity with the consumer. I hope that we're not here a year from now saying it's going to be 3 more years when mobile strikes. It does seem like we're at more of an inflection point.
Yeah.
We're all going to be. I'm certain that the members listening are going to be checking out the wine and the tequila when they encounter failure, but they shouldn't be undaunted as they take some risks. And I think just your career advice and your orientation to that is, I think, especially relevant. I mean, you are a digital native. You're one of the people who has really been leading the way in this area. You're a very thought-provoking and thoughtful leader in that area. And I think the fact that you've been able to forge a career, the way that you have without necessarily moving, but moving within the place that you're at and continuing to really forge and kind of not look back, but keep that entrepreneurial spirit. Your company's really lucky to have you, Razorfish, and it's really been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.